would like to call the Natural Resource Board in open. Could we stand and say the pledge? Could we have roll call, please?
Good evening, Board. First on our list, Gil Gordian, absent. Jim Clifton, he requested excused absence. Rose Glaser, per the last meeting, she had informed us that she'd be out the next two meetings. Bob Hergolski.
Here.
Andrea Ring.
Here.
Vicki Tunker, absent. Ann Lucier.
Here.
And Mr. Waragoda, he had emailed me about his absence, and I guess we can get into that later or now.
Could we note that he's been absent since November? He has not shown up since the November meeting?
Chair, yes, per your last discussion, we had this issue regarding him being commissioner being absent, so we'll put it on record that he's absent again. However, I was informed through our secretary that his absences were approved by the previous chair up until September. We weren't aware of that either. So just want to make sure you're aware he was given the okay from our previous chair.
Okay.
Okay.
And Dave, did you call Dave's name?
Dick. No, Dick.
Yes, you did. I'm sorry. All right. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm the new alternate. My name is Dick Kroll. Want me to tell a little bit about myself?
Yep.
Been in Sebastian about a year and a half, married. I retired. I still have an 18-year-old daughter at home. Always have lived, prior to this, on acreage. Always had a big garden. Love organic gardening and landscape gardening. I've got a business background in marketing and advertising. Many years in home building, tied to marketing and advertising, and golf, in the golf industry, believe it or not. I've always been involved in a lot of things, either on committees or on organizations or chairing organizations and so on, whether they be civic or business or community, what have you. I'm just served on the Charter Review Committee here in town, and I'm an alternate on the Citizens Advisory Committee for the MPO in the county. Also very involved in our homeowners association where I live. Kind of the watchdog of my community for watering and fertilization issues and things like that. I've got a reputation. Other than that, I think I can help. I've got a little bit of a disability, but I think I can help in many ways in terms of organization, advertising, print production. I've got a lot of experience in that. Event management, done a lot of events and so on. So glad to be aboard.
Thank you. Very good.
Chair?
Yes?
Just a quick note, since we're short on the members, and since Dick is an alternate, he for tonight he'll be an acting member, so he can vote.
Yes, thank you. All right. Do we have any agenda modifications? None. Okay. We're up to approval of minutes, and I would like to move that we postpone approval of the July 5th minutes until September's meeting to make revisions. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? I think mainly the motion, we made a motion and it's not in the minutes of who made it, who seconded it. and, then the outcome of the vote. I caught a couple of misspellings. One was probably due to, your word correct. But the major one is, there's nothing under staff. Staff matters is blank. And we had a lot of discussion last month for staff matters, so I kinda would like all that in the minutes. Any other discussion? All right, I need a vote. I think a yea or nay would do. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And motion's carried. Thank you. All right. We're on unfinished business, and we have elections, and I guess this is elections for vice chair, and I would like to table that until next meeting also. Any discussion? Do we need a motion? Okay. B, we have the invasive plant brochure. Anybody, want to talk about the invasive plant brochure? We have a member coming up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Schnee, and,
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you.
did they forward?
Yep. Yep, we got it.
Okay, you already have it. Okay, it's not final yet, so you've already seen it probably. You notice we have City of Sebastian Natural Resources Board on the back, in addition to some other people that have been working on putting this together. It's not finalized. The picture of the old world climbing fern is actually a native pepper vine, so that was a pure accident. Volunteers are working on this, and they pulled the wrong picture. And we got to get a picture of a Mexican petunia. Those pretty purple flowers that everybody has everywhere. They're very invasive. And there's only like one wording change that I noticed. The website for the Friends of St. Sebastian River was wrong. So unless anybody else has any other wording changes, we'll, proceed to finalize it. And, you could let me know
The only question,
later, I guess.
is this really our, symbol, or is this the city's symbol? Is that our board symbol?
You mean the logo?
The logo, yeah.
That's the only logo we have, is the City of Sebastian.
Okay.
I know you had talked about printing, and I don't know if you did. Ann, did you say you had came up with some printing costs?
Well, I know we have money in our budget. I'm not sure. We're in the middle of doing the Champion Tree program, doing flyers for that as an educational piece as well. And the gentleman that was doing the pricing submitted pricing to the board. It's in this packet of ours. Let me find it. Do you know where it is in his notes? Okay, must be on the other side. I'll take yours for just 1 second, Bob, sorry. He's got a cost for printing on paper samples provided, $47.50 for 50 copies, $85 for 100 copies.
How much for 100, Ann?
$85,
85?
yeah.
Is that's on glossy or on?
He's got a preference to 100 copies on, he said the glossy paper is much better.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure it is, because that's what this would be.
Yeah. I came up with prices down at the Total Prints, the only place I went to right down the street here, for $180 on the glossy paper.
Yeah.
So, I guess if you do plan to print some, if you could let us know how many you're going to print. You might want to print enough to distribute yourself somewhere. I would even recommend that all of the, that you distribute it to all of the yard workers, what do you call the, yard
Landscaping
maintenance
crews?
companies? So that their workers are familiar with what invasive plants are. I don't know how many of them there are. I know, sometimes I think don't they have meetings here in this building?
Landscaping crews?
Maybe not. I know
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember seeing them once.
We don't have a committee that has those organizations here at the chambers. No, we don't.
Well, anyway, whoever you think you might be able to distribute to, let me know how many copies you want to print, and then we will probably print some more. And then we want to send them out to some homeowners. The Friends of St. Sebastian River does, property owners that live along the river. I want to get copies out to the Visitor Center at the State Park, the Chamber of Commerce, lots of different places. So once I know how many you're going to print, then I'll know how many more that we might need to print.
Well, we hadn't really decided on how many more flyers we were gonna print of the Champion Tree program either. That we hadn't decided, 'cause we do have a few now, but
Right,
I'm sorry, Anna.
we will probably decide this next meeting because we have our Champion Tree program brochure that we want to print first. And, we wanna make sure we have the money to print that. So I'm thinking we might be able to do some of both, 'cause we do have like $200, $280 something.
283, I believe it is. But I don't know how many we already have of the Champion Tree either. That was the other thing. I wasn't sure what we had of that, so. Do you know, Frank, by any chance, how many flyers we have for the Champion Tree?
I know we've made internally, in-house, city staff, Michelle has made, several packets, and they're right now distributed within City Hall, within the
Yeah.
little pockets. And you are correct, when I checked, it was 286 in your
286,
current budget,
okay.
remaining. So I think you have sufficient to do both, really. But it's
Yeah,
up to, I think it's fair to have Jim here when you make that decision, 'cause he's been chairing this.
Right.
Yeah, so next meeting we'll let you know, okay?
Okay, thank you very much
Well,
for
thank you, Jane. You did a
helping
great
out
job.
with this, because it has so many benefits. Even less herbicides will be needed to be used because, conservation areas, et cetera, aren't gonna be using herbicides to get rid of them if people get rid of them in their own yards and don't plant them in their own yards. And, it'll help a lot of different things, our animals, our wildlife. So, thank you very much.
Excuse me, Jane, one question. Now, are any of you mentioned when you say you will print more, is it one of these organizations here listed, or just the Native Plant Society will be printing some more of these flyers? I'm asking who is actually gonna pay for the printing for the rest of them? I'm just trying to make sure
Who's going to pay for the rest of them?
Mhm.
I don't know. I volunteered to do it if I couldn't get anybody else, so.
Okay. Well, we should just join forces as best we can,
Right.
is my point, to make
I'm
sure that we
that
make
between
it.
these other organizations, they can
I mean, if we have,
all chip in.
right, if we chip in, and do some type of volume discount, that would make most sense to me, but, as we talked about, we'll have to wait till Mr. Clifton returns at our next meeting to make our final decision, but we certainly support this. This is a great effort. I don't think you were here last meeting, but we asked the question, are there any model ordinances regarding, the control of invasive plants on vacant lots? That's one of the things that we're really concerned about too. We have the city code which requires, when a lot is developed, for these to be removed, but the vacant lots now obviously really provide a seed source for Brazilian pepper and some of the other plants, and some of the sweet potato vine is spreading all over, so there's definitely a big concern. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jane.
Okay. Now we're up to the Champion Tree program, and, Jim did include in our packet the dollars, and, should we go ahead and just go get them printed and us decide which kind of paper and how many? I mean, there's 4 of us, or do you think we should wait?
I think we should wait for him, only because he spearheaded this whole thing. Waiting another month is not gonna impact 'cause we need these for Earth Day, for anything else that we happen to do, so,
Well, that was the other, what do we do in September? See, my feeling is we really need to have them whenever we go someplace. And if we're gonna be someplace in September, and I don't know if we are or not.
No, we've never have done,
We've never had
no.
anything, so, okay, October then?
And my question is, for Frank, you mentioned the city's just already printed 60 just for their use, so I assume it wouldn't cost a lot more, or the city could, if we actually needed some more, we could get them before we actually get them printed, I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the quality is not as good as, of course, if you went to
Yeah.
a reproduction like Total Prints, but if all of a sudden, if you had to go someplace, you needed 50 or 100, we could make them here. But I think when you make them through a
Right.
Total Prints, you get that quality, the paper and the appearance and everything, and that's what you want to show off as the quality.
Yeah.
Right.
mhm.
So my point, Madam Chair, is that we can wait till September. If we came down that we needed some, we could certainly get them through the city, I think.
Okay, all right.
So I recommend we wait till Mr. Clifton gets here, since he spearheaded this effort.
All right, I don't think we need to vote, we'll just, okay, we'll put that one till September also. All right, we're up to the sewer, and we do have a presentation, so, Mr. Burke? I didn't say that right, Burke, right?
Which, is it this microphone? All right, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I am the Utilities Director with Indian River County Utilities, and I apologize for you guys looking at my back. My wife or somebody may say this is my best side, but I'll address the board and perhaps answer some questions after I'm done, so. A little bit about myself. I also have an 18-year-old daughter, as was discussed earlier, though she's going to college in a month, and so you can probably see some of the gray hair that's starting to come in with that transition period. But I went to school up in Boston, played hockey at the university, Tufts University, and then I followed a girl down here to Florida, and I thought I'd be here for a year. Turns out, going into my 19th year here, kind of like it. This place has grown on me. So I've been with the Indian River County Utilities Department for about 4 years now. My 4-year anniversary will be in November of this year. I have my PE license. I also am a licensed general contractor in the state of Florida. So in my previous life in working for Florida Atlantic University, it was part of a unique process where there was $45 million of state appropriations in order to bolster up a research and scientific organization that I was part of to be able to build laboratory space, lift stations, RO plants, and a plethora of other facilities. So I was fortunate to be able to do that. But that was in my previous life when the earth was cooling, and now as Director of Utilities, I'm responsible for the water, wastewater, and reuse. And so just this past week we were reaching a milestone of over 48,000 accounts. We've grown quite a bit over the years, consisting of 859 plus miles of water mains throughout the county, city of Sebastian, town of Orchid, and a few places in the town of Indian River Shores. Over 4,291 hydrants. We're adding more with some of the number of sites that have been fallow for a number of years that are now coming back. I was recently talking to the board the other day. We are averaging over 105 new water meter installs a month. So the development has picked up pace with some of the large builders, GHO Homes, D.R. Horton, some of those folks where they're now starting to build some houses. So in addition to that, we are also in charge of the Solid Waste and Disposal District. Acronym is SWID, which is funded by the non-ad valorem rates, which are not tied to the value of your house, but through an assessment per se that appears on your tax bill. And that is responsible for the landfill charges and the recycling. So everybody was part of the process where we went to single stream recycling, having done the old system of the blue bins, for those of you who are here long enough to remember that. And we've had a large increase. In fact, in the recycling world, we've exceeded our annual average of the tonnages collected in the first 9 months just going to single stream. So we have 3 more months to go, but we are certainly excited. And then we awarded a new franchise to Waste Management with that starting last October. So in all, over 42 plus $1 million budget. It's, I think, equal to what the sheriff spends on his budget on a yearly basis under the utilities umbrella, if you will. So tonight my Presentation will be kind of a threefold process, maybe four if you want to count the brief overview, but we're going to talk a little bit about septic systems, so I apologize to the smart people in the crowd as well as to the board if this is kind of, old information, but certainly just wanted to lay the groundwork of how we got to this point. We talk about some of the collection systems, what's available, what's out there today, and some of the work that the county has done, not necessarily on the building portion of it, but certainly some of the studies that have been going kind of behind the scenes. And then lastly, we'll follow up with moving forward or some of the next steps that will be taken. So here's a little schematic of what it appears to be, a septic system, or what the Department of Health or Florida calls the on-site treatment and disposal systems, the acronym OSTDS. And this effluent is capable of causing some groundwater and possibly surface water contamination. I say capable not because all of them do, but certainly it has the availability to do so. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see some of the constituents of effluent that leaves a residential house per se, with the total nitrogen, it's hard to read in the yellow, about 60 milligrams per liter. Total phosphorus, just over about 10 milligrams per liter. Certainly a number of bacteria and the coliform present, and anything else flushed down the drain that happens to be in like the dishwasher or TSP or soap or some other things that make its way, fats, oils and grease that make its way into the septic system. Some of the newer systems have filters before the drain field. Some of the older ones do not. It goes into the drain field and then enters into the groundwater. So we're roughly saying that on average, per person day produces about 50 to 80 gallons. And you think, well, that's actually quite a bit. In some cases, like California, they're actually a lot higher, over about 110, 120 gallons per person per day. But here we are being a little bit conservative, and that is things like flushing the toilet, washing your hands, showering, making coffee, doing dishes. So we average about 50 to 80 gallons, which is tied to what we use in our capacity, which is an ERU, which is an equivalent residential unit, and that is assigned to one residential house, which produces about total 250 gallons per day of water consumed or wastewater produced. So keep that ERU in mind for a little bit later. But on average, depending on who you talk to, Chesapeake Bay Studies, DEP, EPA, Department of Health, we're estimating that between 7 to 14 pounds of nitrogen per person per year leaves that drain field and can enter the water column. And again, it depends on the type of septic system, the age, and some other factors, soil types. So we do say the grass is always
Excuse me,
greener.
Mr. Burke, do you mind a question while you're talking,
Sure.
or would you rather prefer wait till the end?
I could take them at the end. Certainly, there's a lot of information.
Okay.
But I'm at your pleasure. If you want to fire away, I'm willing.
I can wait. I was just wondering about what happens. You mentioned what happens with nitrogen, but at the end, I'd just like to know what happens to the other components, things like phosphorus. Are they taken up by the soil or what? But we can talk about that at the end.
Okay. Okay. So again, the grass is always green over the septic tank because of the dissolved nutrients that are there. In some cases, the dissolved nutrients of total nitrogen, TN, or total phosphorus, TP, can lead to some oxygen-reducing algal blooms that we've all read about in the papers over the last several years. Certainly from some of the anthropogenic influences, whether or not you're talking about some of the septic tanks or some of the discharges that have been occurring. And all that's related to the turbidity in the water and the proliferation, or lack thereof, of the seagrass growth that has been mapped by St. John's and some of the work that they've done to ground truth and to use some satellite technology to really see if the seagrass is receding or growing. The sewage can contaminate the water supply wells, and from failing systems it can carry some of that bacteria that we had talked about and some potential viruses as well. So a nice note too is a failing septic system leaks long before it emits foul odors. So a question I have later on is what defines a working septic tank? Here's a very basic diagram of advanced wastewater treatment facility that we have at our 3 regional wastewater treatments throughout Indian River County. Right now we have about 12.5 MBD of permitted capacity. We're using 50 to 60% of that. So there's additional capacity in the system. but you have some, initial screening, clarification, aeration, additional clarification. We have return activated sludge that's used, sludge digesters. We treat that sludge at a biosolids facility down near the landfill. And then we have some disinfection of the liquid effluent. And we have a bevy of technological systems in place to be able to meet or exceed our permitted systems. We're going through right now a permit renewal for a South County wastewater treatment system. We just recently went through a permit renewal, 5-year operating permit renewal for the West Regional wastewater treatment system that has some very stringent operating parameters, not only for the effluent quality, but that water that has to go to either, in this case, some of the RIBS, which is a rapid infiltration basin system, percolation type system, or where we send that water out to some of the golf courses that use that for irrigation purposes, so they're not sucking up the groundwater, or for some groundwater recharge. And we have a wetland treatment system right next to our wastewater treatment plant as well, that is quite popular with the Florida Audubon Society and attracting wading birds through a series of different depths of some of the cells that we use to keep that hydrated. But one of the things I do want to highlight is the removal rates of some of the dissolved nutrients. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see in the highlighted yellow that the advanced wastewater treatment can see removal rates of 98% reduction in TP, total phosphorus, and greater than 94% reduction of the total nitrogen, which far exceeds some of the basic or rudimentary processes that take place in people's backyards. Here's just another cartoon diagram that we put together to say that there's many different factors that can affect water quality. Here in Indian River County, we have the St. Sebastian River, and they have the 3 main relief canal systems. And it's been reported that on an average daily flow, those 3 main relief canal systems convey up to 100 million gallons a day. And so in wet weather discharges, you have some higher than normal rates, and then when you go through a drought, those rates are going to be low. But we have a lot of data from the USGS staff gauges, as well as Mr. Gunter, that takes quarterly sample to find some of the flow that goes from west to east for a large area. So again, this is just a rudimentary, not to say this is in River County, but certainly there could be other factors that would or could lead to some of the deteriorated quality of water that goes into the Indian River Lagoon. So I don't know if everybody knows here that in 2013, the Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, deemed the Indian River Lagoon as an impaired water body. And as such, then the county was required to put in a very strict fertilizer ordinance. They did that. I was there for that meeting. It was a 12-plus hour meeting, very contentious meeting. The board had previously wanted to do education rather than enforcement, and now that they're in the enforcement phase because of the impaired water body, they hired a young lady to go out there to make sure that people have the licenses to apply fertilizer and that they're not applying fertilizer during the wrong periods of time. And also in trying to educate not only the residents but also the big box stores like the Home Depots and the Lowe's to make sure that they're aware of the local ordinance, even though they're a national firm bringing in fertilizer that may not meet some of the requirements. So that's all tied to ultimately the health of the lagoon, and our portion tonight is just to concentrate on the septic tanks, but certainly it all ties together. This is the Department of Health matrix that I took from one of their websites. There's a few other options on here as far as what our folks, our neighbors to the north are looking at to throw in some additional treatment processes at the homeowner end for adding things like pumps and different Bold and Gold filter media in the backyard to try to remove some of the additional nutrients that would be present. But certainly the top two are what we're looking at just with the legacy system, some of those ones that are pre-1983 where your vadose zone, that 24-inch separation is actually less than that for some of these pre-1983 septic tanks. and in some cases that drain field is in the water table. How do we know that? Because we went out and took some soil samples and we did some water table investigations, and it was very close to the surface. And then this is just the baseline, not to say all of them will meet or exceed this nitrogen and other treatment effectiveness at 30%, but certainly it's just something as a benchmark in comparison to some of the regional advanced treatment that we had talked about previously. And so I'd asked the question earlier, and so we just threw some notes on here, is, you know, if it's older than 1983, how do we know that the maintenance has been done on that tank? How do we know that that tank is not leaking? How do we know that there are not other issues with that tank settling or whatnot? How do we know certain areas have a high water table? Some of the residents today may be educated in that regard, but some of them may not. And so to them, if the tank is working, that means their toilets are flushing. But working for a septic tank may not be working for Mother Nature. And so we are concerned with trying to find ways to effectively capture those nutrients before they go into the water column in such a way that makes sense for the environment and doesn't hurt the pocketbook as well. So here's the location of the septic tanks in Indian River County. I want to thank the GIS folks, Will Rice and his staff. Great bunch of people. It's hard to read this if you can't sleep at night. You can go to www.ircutilities.com, and on the right-hand part of that page will be this map that you can download, the PDF map. And what it is a combination of data that we really didn't have good Department of Health data, not to throw them under the bus, but they really did not have really good data. So we had to back into this data using data from the City of Vero Beach, City of Fellsmere, and Indian River County Utilities. And then we had to find out where some of the tanks were known and make some guesses as far as whether or not some of these parcels do not have tanks. So some of these parcels that you see here may have a small structure, but you'll see quite a large coloration. That's because that's the entire parcel. So I just highlighted on the right-hand side. It's hard to tell, but you have a yellow dashed outline of the city of Sebastian, and you'll see the conglomeration. So the green and the red. The green is before 1983 on that map, and the red is after 1983. But again, this PDF is found on www.ircutilities.com on the right-hand side of that screen, if you'd care to download that to get some more information. So how many are there? So again, the GIS folks were able to compile the parcel count and really distinguish if it was built before 83 or after 83. Again, 83 being that kind of line in the sand between the requirements of creating that 24-inch or greater separation after 1983. And you can see that in the county, unincorporated part of the county, has the vast majority of the tanks. Of the total just over 30,000 tanks, majority, 63% of those are in the county. And again, this is data back from 2013. Some of the numbers may have changed slightly, but we haven't done another iteration since that time. The GIS folks haven't, so I pulled that data from a few years ago. I apologize if it's not totally up to date. But I recently asked the GIS folks to say, okay, in the city of Sebastian, there's about 14,000 parcels. Right? And of those parcels, about 11,000, just over, maybe 10.5, are developed. And of those developed parcels, how many are on septic tank or how many are on water and sewer? And right now it's about 78 to 80, 79% are on septic tank. So if we go back to that map and look at the yellow lines, and again, I apologize, it's hard to read. In the city of Sebastian, you do have a high density of those parcels that have county water. Some parcels do not. Some parcels are still on well water and septic tank, but the majority of them are on county water. But again, a great majority of those are on septic tank as well. So some of the concerns in the septic tank is obviously we talked about the nutrient loading, we talked a little bit about the age of the system. Another concern is the proximity to a water body. In this case, we deem that to be a lagoon or pond, canal system, or St. Sebastian River. What I did not include in this presentation is some of the work that Dr. Lapointe and Marie Ternowski and Laura Heron have done. I could talk another hour, another presentation on some of that stuff that they did at random sample sites along the 3 relief canals and the St. Sebastian River to try to look at some of the loading, not only at groundwater but surface water. And so we're going to look at the classification of the surface water body depending on its priority. Obviously, the density number of houses in a given area for the lot side and ultimately the loading concentrations. The water table, we talked about that. You know, is it deep? Is it shallow? And some of the effects of nitrification or lack thereof depending on the water table. The soil types, whether or not there's a well water. There's about 1,100 folks that are in the city of Sebastian that are not on county water. So certainly if they have a close septic tank to their well, there's a concern. And obviously the groundwater flow and direction, what's happening beneath the surface. Second part of this presentation, the types of sewer systems. So the 3 that I'm going to go over are vacuum, low pressure, and gravity. So again, I apologize for not being able to zoom into some of these pictures, but a vacuum system is one that actually pulls the material from the house. At the top of the screen you can see a little stair-step configuration. What that means is we can run that vacuum pipe in some directions, in, around, above, or under potential conflicts. At the bottom left-hand part of your screen you have a lid that's removed, and you have an actuator type system that works off of ambient pressure versus the pressure in a confined space. And as that confined space fills up with liquid and other material from the house, there's a differential pressure system that's created. And at a certain point that switch opens up, in which case the material is pulled along that stair step to a central collector type system. And that central collector type system is a pretty mechanically and electrically intensive operation. Have a receiver tank that has to hold that material, and then on the back end of that, on the right hand part of the screen, you have sewage pumps that takes that material, pressurizes it, and then sends it up, over, or downstream into an existing force main towards the regional station. So it's a pretty sophisticated system. You can see the roof. Some of these are designed to look like houses. They look quite nice with stucco systems. They're in use down in Monroe County. We have one in use today near the city of Vero Beach, in a place called Rock Ridge, where it's very difficult to try to punch through that hard rock material, so you can't get a gravity system in place. And so prior to my arrival, after the storms, the hurricanes, the twin hurricanes in 2003 and 4, this system was put in with some of the FEMA dollars, where they had a different type of system in place, and it's worked quite well. We've had multiple flooding events. We've had multiple power failures to where we have an automatic transfer switch set up. So in the event that the power goes out, we can still provide services. That was not the case in the storm, and there was literally sewage backing up into people's houses because of the storm surge and because of the failing sewer system. And so this system has replaced that and made it a lot better for some of the folks who live over in Rock Ridge. So again, the vacuum system is one that pulls off the differential pressure to a central location. The pros being you can run that at a very shallow depth as opposed to some of the gravity systems that are out there. Some of the cons being you are constrained to the number of homes that you can have on a collector type system based on the limited capacity of that vacuum system. And so you want to be able to centralize that collector so that you can branch out in multiple locations and not have one long string and perhaps have a leak down the way. You can have some smaller segments to identify leaks or cases where a pipe might have been hit by a contractor or something to that effect. So that's the vacuum system. It's a low pressure system. I apologize. I pulled this off the internet. It's not totally accurate, but it's just used for visual purposes. Where you have a wet well type system, a small pump and collector that's outside the house. There's power that's needed from the house. The sewage comes gravity into this collector system, and then you basically have a grinder pump that pressurizes that material and sends it off-site. In this case, it's showing a gravity system. That may be the case, but in other cases, there's a force main out there that's a pressurized main that these folks tie into. This was the kind of system that was over in Rockridge, but it was a system where it was taken over by the utility department. It was not really installed to our utility standards today, and when the power went out and when the storm surge occurred, they had some problems. So what's good about this is you can run that pipe at varying depths in and around obstacles. At the bottom of the page you can kind of see the control panel. There's a little red light for a high-level alarm type system. If for some reason the pump fails, seal fails, or if you have a power failure, you only have a finite amount of storage space. You really don't have a great amount of storage space. So, for instance, in the storms of 2004-05, the county water did not shut off, but people were at their homes, they weren't working, and they're still doing dishes, they're still using the water, taking showers. They may not have had power, but certainly if they had reason to be at home, they were still using that water. So one of the concerns with a low pressure system is the water's still on, but it's not being conveyed off site. And so some owners can't afford a generator, and that's one of the caveats here is you're really susceptible to the power company if you do not have a backup generator type system to run these. So that's a low pressure system. Again, just a small wet well grinder pump tied to the home's electric system. The operation and maintenance is the responsibility of that homeowner, and the utility takes over once it's tied in off-site of the property, usually in the roadway or right-of-way. Gravity system, this is a very, very basic rudimentary type system, but works on the principle of what flows downhill. It comes out of the house, typically there's a clean out, and then enters into a manhole. There's a lateral that comes from the house and ties into the sewer main and requires no power. It does not matter if the power is lost, if the water's on, goes into a sewer main that then flows downhill to a lift station. Typically those lift stations are built to a higher standard. They're not going to be small residential type, they'll be industrial. There'll usually be 2 pumps there, so if the primary fails you'll have a backup. The wet wells will be much larger. There's usually telemetry involved so that we know remotely if there's a problem. We have sophisticated systems that are able to cycle and either pump up or pump down remotely depending on the demand of the system. That helps on the surge at our plant. But also there's some TVSS units, surge units, and in some cases our standards require us to put a standby generator in at some of these larger lift stations. And so those 300 and so commercial lift stations that we operate and maintain would be able to take the flow and continue to operate with or without power. We are in storm season, knock on wood, but every year before storm season begins, we go through the process of running our generators, making sure everything is okay, because we'd like to find out before August or September that we have a problem, and that's what we typically do every year to make sure that these lift stations are attended to. Plus we have mechanics that go there on a routine basis to wash the systems down and make sure they're operating properly. All right, so get through the boring stuff now, the exciting stuff, the county update. Just a little bit about what has been done, what is being done right now, and what will be done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a sewer feasibility studies that we started a couple of years ago. I'm going to talk about the draft sewer matrix, unbiased ranking system. I'm going to talk about the arc inlet model calibration that you may or may not have heard of, and the North County septic to sewer conversion process, which is, I think, why I was asked to come talk tonight. So sewer feasibility studies, we looked at 2 places. One was Summer Place up north of Disney, old residential neighborhood that is on county water, but currently on septic, and then the North County Sebastian area on the bottom right. And tonight I'm fortunate to have Mr. Earl Masteller, who is the engineer of record for the design of that. So certainly if there are some easy questions, I'll take those. If there's hard questions, I'll give them to Earl. And, he's here to just kind of be listening if there's any specific questions, but certainly he's been very instrumental in helping us, the Indian River County Utility Department, move this process forward. So the draft sewer matrix was based on a Department of Health model in Volusia County from 2013. And it was really a numerical ranking system that did not have any emotions tied to it or any political issues tied to it, but was based on things like soil permeability, what kind of soils are in place, you know, does the water drain fast, does it creep through there, the water body index, again, we talked about the proximity to the water body or canal system, the age of the septic tank, pre or post 1983, how high or low is that water table, whether or not there's somebody on potable water supply, or is there a need or concern if they're on private well water, and how close that well is to the septic tank, and the density, again, tied to some of the concentration, the number of homes per acre. So the sewer matrix formula, and I apologize if it's hard to read, it was cut and paste from another presentation that I did to the Board of County Commissioners, is really just a very simplistic formula. A plus C plus D plus E in the numerator over B times F in the denominator. What do those mean? Well, A was the permeability index. And so we had a 1 through 5 ranking of the types of soils depending on if they were poorly drained or if they drained quite rapidly. C was the average age of the septic systems. If they were greater than a certain age, they had a higher, like a 5 was the highest number. And if they were newer, they had a 1. So we had a average age of those systems. The water table index, again, was broken into a 1 through 5 designation depending on the depth. If it was relatively shallow, it received a higher ranking versus a deeper or lower water table. The potable water supply index was a ranking of 0 to 5, depending on if the person was or was not connected to county water. On the bottom part of the page, you had the water body index, and so these were less than 1 in some cases, depending on the proximity to a particular water body index, which would then make the overall number greater, again based on the Volusia model, and the density index. So when you combine the density and a water body index number, that would help then to determine the overall ranking in the system. So again, this is just draft. This was a very quick, down and dirty system, but eventually what we wanted to do was to look at places that would score high. And ironically enough, the North County Sebastian Ursel Dune Heights area scored pretty high, as did Summer Place, where we did the feasibility studies, and areas in proximity to the South Relief Canal. So again, this is draft, not for public consumption because it's still a work in progress, but what we wanted to do is get like a stoplight type of system, you know, green being not so bad, red being, hey, we need to do something, or yellow needing further consideration. And we have different parts of the county where, you know, those color coordinated results were put up there. But I bring your attention to the right-hand part of the screen where we had the South Relief Canal, and in addition to the two that we had mentioned before, the South Relief Canal, where you see that red in the center of the screen, was an area that scored relatively high. So during this process, we found out that Port St. Lucie had been working with the Department of Environmental Protection and FSU to basically use a modeling type system called ArcInlet. And it stands for ArcGIS, with the GIS being the Graphical Information System. That map that we kind of looked at is the GIS-based system. And the other part of the acronym is the Nitrate Load Estimation Tool. We're going to get you to the ArcInlet. And the ArcInlet is a groundwater simulated nitrogen transport model and distribution based on inputs to look at some of the loading from septic tanks to the surrounding area, soils and or water body. So this has been used in Jacksonville. It was used in Port St. Lucie. It has been used in Martin County, for folks that may or may not be aware of some of the decisions that were made recently in Martin County, and it's ongoing in Indian River County. Again, in partnership with the DEP and Florida State University, Dr. Ming Yi from the Department of Scientific Computing. So again, this is just a model to simulate the flow of nutrients coming from a septic tank, the nitrogen nutrients. It's a conceptual model that is dovetailed into the county's GIS system. It generates plumes of nitrate and ammonium separately, depending on those factors, and it is compatible with some of the older and some of the new versions of our GIS that we currently use. And it's actually uploaded on the FSU website, so if you're interested and have a GIS version, you can actually download this tool to use as part of the GIS that you have. So the DEP hired a well contractor. There were some delays. There was a new secretary, and some of the signatures got lost or something like that. So we were waiting patiently to actually move this process forward between initially finding out about this program and actually being able to punch some holes in the ground. So the South Relief Canal was selected. There were 4 large wells. There were some telemetry type systems that I'll show a picture of later with solar cells, battery packs, and mobile devices that convey some of the data collected, and 13 smaller wells. And all this was done to basically calibrate the ARC inlet model. So we have the model that is a desktop model where we had to estimate based on LiDAR data, which is some of the topographic data, what the water table was based on some of the contour elevations. So we had to make some assumptions. And we also had to make some assumptions on the soil type. But staff did a great job of providing a lot of inputs to do the initial run, but we wanted to calibrate that run based on some real field verifiable data. And again, this is just a snapshot of data for a particular time. What we really want to do is to get some of the dry weather, some of the wet weather, and we have wells set at a certain height, whereas Morton County actually put 3 different wells on one property owner to look at shallow, medium, and deep processes going on, and they can vary depending on the type of soils and the type of precipitation or the amount of precipitation that happens. So again, I just want to put that caveat out there. It's just a small snapshot of what's happening out there. So this is kind of like a graphical, hey, this is what happens. You can see other parts of the screen where you don't see the plume. That's a good thing. That's where we have gravity type systems in place. And then you can see some of the monitoring wells that are put out based on a hypothetical model run to try to determine what's happening at some of these locations. And on the bottom part of your screen, that's at the slight diagonal, is the South Relief Canal. That being under the purview of David Gunner, who's the superintendent of the Indian River Farms Water Control District. So you can see we had some monitoring wells kind of strategically placed throughout the South Relief Canal area. So again, the contractor was Cardno. I have a typo here. It wasn't 25 wells, less than that, but certainly they were put in fall of 2015 throughout the summer of 2016. We still have those wells in place, and we will continue to do some monitoring. But again, we wanted to set the wells up on some of the larger ones to look at the flow direction and some of the results of the groundwater flow and those rates. Interestingly enough, before they actually punched the wells in, this was a surface water pond at one of the home sites where you can see the pond shown in blue and some of the potential loadings, and you'll see a lot of cattails, you'll see a lot of superficial algae, which is indicative of obviously some of the nutrients that are present. Whether or not it's from fertilizer or from other sources, we don't know, but certainly it's not a nice clear pond, but certainly one that has some algae growth and some invasives. So the model calibration estimation is to take some of that data that we get from those wells that are put into the ground, specific locations for those water quality results, and some of the data that we got from the south area. So what did we learn? What we learned is that we need to do more data collection. We learned that we do have places where there's high organic material that we did not know about initially. So what happened is Cardinal went back at the request of DEP to actually punch additional wells in at different depths, and so now we're going to have almost 2 different depths at I believe 3 locations to be able to compare. some of that data. And we are in the process of collecting that data through the DEP and through their contractor to be able to take that data and then assimilate that information back to the model to find out if we're overestimating or if we're underestimating some of those nitrate loads that go to the groundwater. This picture on the left is some of the telemetry that I talked about. It's a pretty sophisticated system that runs off some of the solar power, that has a battery pack that charges the battery and then sends some of the data remotely to the DEP. And so because that was just one snapshot, we wanted to make sure that we were not just looking at one particular area, but another area, which is up here in Sebastian, east of US 1 and also west of US 1, what we typically call the Dune Heights. And it's hard to see, and I apologize for the blue. I probably should have made them red. As you'll see here, additional wells that we'll be installing to do the very same type of data collection, where you do have topographic changes from one area to the water to the St. Sebastian River. You do have a different soil type, sandy soils, which we believe is going to lead to high percolation. And again, to try to capture some of the data from this area in comparison to some of the data in the south, where there's high organic material, where in this case there's going to be more sandy type of material, and then take that data and then have Dr. Ming-Yi and his associates rerun the calibration to look at some of the potential loadings. And why is this important? Because we're trying to figure out, what's causing, obviously, some of the issues in the lagoon and the St. Sebastian River. So North County Septic to Sewer Program, Phase 1 is east of US 1. It's hard to see here, but yellow is the entire area, bordered by Roseland Road, the St. Sebastian River, bisected by US Highway 1. And so Phase 1 initially was just to the east side of US 1. Phase 2, residential portion, Dune Heights, west of Roseland Road type. That's shown in the yellow outline. Portions of it are inside the city of Sebastian, portions are in the north part of the county, unincorporated part of the county. And so the commercial area. Sure. Ruffner, yeah. Ruffner Lane, Bay Street, North Central Avenue. That was part of the overall design for the transition from septic to sewer. We don't yet have the DEP calibrated stuff that I was talking about back here, but that's more of the Dune type of wells that we have just literally a couple weeks ago just installed that. So we're going to be again trying to collect that data, and we'd like to have the data for the wet season and for the dry season to compare the two. So this yellow outline again is just to outline the North County Septic to Sewer area that Masteller-Moeller was charged with designing. They've completed the commercial sector, which is my next screen, and right now they're ongoing with Phase 2, which is the area west of, primarily the area west of US 1 for the residential portion. So that's, the design is ongoing for that. So this green area are the commercial sectors that are along US Highway 1. It must be noted too that we have DEP permits. We have FDOT permits for this work. We'll work with Mr. Watanabe and Mr. Spurka's group to obtain right-of-way permits where needed. You can see the yellow hashed area or commercial areas served by existing sanitary sewer right now in the bottom right-hand corner, but the green areas along US 1. Talking to some folks where some of the growth has been hampered in this area because of the septic tank restrictions. We've had multiple inquiries on the technical review side from folks who would like to purchase the properties that have not purchased the properties because there is no infrastructure, and that will solve that problem. That will solve some of the economic hampered growth, and when that does come, when we have this infrastructure, and they'll be required to connect to the existing system. So we are looking at not only the environmental benefits, but certainly some of the economic benefits that may lead to, some additional revenues for taxes and things like that. So the commercial area design is 100% complete. It is shovel ready. I had mentioned some of the permits that are already in hand. And I'd also like to mention that recently, the county was awarded, cost share funding from the St. Johns River Water Management District for the commercial area. So if you look at the entire area, that I had shown is quite a large area, but right now we're just focusing on the commercial area along the US 1 frontage, north and south of the cemetery, and in some of the areas that we had mentioned. So the cost share funding is for fiscal year 16-17. It was awarded by the St. Johns River Water Management Board on June 14th. It only pays up to 33% of the construction costs. So if any project you have soft costs, administration, engineering, and other fees, inspection fees that go towards that. But for our purposes, the grant is only for the actual construction cost and up to 33%. So that's a maximum, that's a not to exceed, about $649,240.35. The engineer's estimated opinion of probable cost is about $2.1 million. Again, that's just for the commercial one area. The grant, which has not yet been executed, will need to be executed by not only the Board of County Commissioners, but has to go through legal review on both sides. There's some caveats on both sides for timetables and milestones and draws that are in there. And so that process will probably begin, I would imagine, in the month of September, October, to try to finalize and get signature approval on the grant. So even though it's been awarded for fiscal year 16-17, we still need to go through some logistics to try to get that agreement signed. But once that agreement is signed, then there's a 24-month process. So because we have the plans 100% complete, because we have the grant funding that's being lined up, it'd then be important to find ways to be able to move that project forward. And that's where the bottom line is really the most important here, is to not only get some support for this project, but also to make sure that those folks, those benefiting properties that we'll be connecting to, will pay some of their fair share costs associated with that. What's interesting to note too is that the city of Sebastian actually has an incentive program, which I applaud them for. It's not a huge pot of money, but it is some money, to be able to connect most recently the folks for the VFW and the American Legion, where the city of Sebastian heard from some of those folks that came here and awarded monies to the good folks of the VFW and American Legion to defray some of the costs to connect. In that case, it was a private lift station tied into a force main, but there were dollars from the city of Sebastian. The utility department extended a line so that they could connect closer, so we incurred some additional costs as well. But again, that partnership will be needed to try to move forward. So certainly there's going to be the delta between what the grant covers and what the cost will be, and that needs to be discussed as far as making it palatable for folks who may not have that money, cash in their bank accounts, to be able to help offset those capital costs. So the next steps, what are we doing moving forward? Well, hopefully we get those agreements inked and signed, and we get moving, and we put it out for bid, and we go through that public procurement process, and we start moving on that phase 1 commercial area. But the BCC back in March directed staff to begin a 4-step process for county-wide septic to sewer priority ranking. So we, staff internally, being task saturated, just kind of did a rudimentary first swipe at that red, green, yellow stoplight matrix, but we have been directed by the board to do a more comprehensive matrix that takes into account soil types, not just from a book that was done 20 years ago, but to actually go out and maybe do soil borings to get actual soil samples to determine what's in there, so that we can create an unbiased ranking system that's a little bit more involved than what we have right now. The second part of that is then to take that ranking system to try to identify the top criteria, and then to put some costs associated, whether or not it's a vacuum system, whether or not it's a gravity system, or whether or not it's a low pressure system, to evaluate the feasibility of those types of systems to see what's going to be most palatable for the homeowners and for the utility. And then also we have to make sure that we have enough capacity in our system. So are those lines sized adequately for those folks when they connect? Do we have the capability in our regional systems to take that additional flow, even though it's going to be a phased approach? And so there's a comprehensive analysis that will be done, not only for the unbiased system, but for the cost that's going to be associated with that, and the impact to our utility system. So that's kind of like step number one. The second step is to take the results of that matrix, and then we sit down with Stan Bowling and his smart folks over in community development, and we carve out a comprehensive plan update, which hasn't been done for a number of years with respect to centralized sewer, so that regardless of who's on the board, and I heard there's an election this year, so there may be some new faces in the crowd come November, that regardless of who's on the board and on the dais, they will have a comprehensive plan that can be used for multiple years, that lays out the strategic pathway forward to be able to connect some of these high priority areas. Again, if you have a ranch land and you're out west of town and you're 1 unit per 20 acres, well, you probably won't make that priority list. But if you're over near the Environmental Learning Center and you're right on the water and you're on a system that's older than 1983, then yeah, you probably will make that list. And so if you have a great number of systems that are on that priority list and you have a little bit of money, how do you spend that money effectively? And that's really going to be coming down to the financial mechanism to incentivize folks to be able to connect with unique financing mechanisms, perhaps prolonged financing options, so that folks are not just hit in the pocketbook. Because everybody loves gravity sewer, just nobody wants to pay for it because it is expensive. But it lasts 50 to 75 years. And then finally, the last phase is implementation and a phased process of how we are going to get these areas implemented, how we're going to do the design, how we're going to phase the construction, and how we're going to be able to abandon those tanks and get these folks connected so that ultimately some of those nutrients that we're still looking at with the arc inlet system, with additional monitoring wells, can start to be able to get onto a centralized system. So we're going to continue to do the arc inlet calibration in the North County area. We'd be happy to share with this board or the City of Sebastian once we have more data. We just need to be able to collect that data for, again, the wet and dry periods. And then as we speak, we're still working with Earl Mastel-Armoller for finishing the phase 2 portion, so that if we can get the commercial area kicked off, we will then be poised to do the second part for the residential areas in and around US 1. So I appreciate the opportunity to come talk. I'm sure there's lots of questions that the board has or the audience has, and so I will be available for any and all questions that you may have.
Let's start with the questions from the board.
I'm got a number of questions, and I'm not sure how educated they are, but so of the three, you mentioned the three systems just in context, and I never realized there may be other types of systems. But in terms of cost, obviously the vacuum system, as you mentioned, you have a continual maintenance cost in terms of electricity and the vacuum system and all those things, and then low pressure. Is that similar to a hybrid system? I know that people have talked about hybrid systems too. Now that still maintains your septic tank, but it pulls the liquids off, right?
Well, that's what, yes and no.
Okay.
The hybrid system really pulls the liquids off and separates that and keeps the solid, and purportedly you have to pump out the solids a lot less frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And talking to Rob Bolton, he was fortunate enough to show me and Eric from our group the system, the Orenco system that's there. It's pretty impressive. But we learned that they're actually severing the drain field, so they're leading people to believe that the drain field is staying there, but that is only the case for 2. There may be more since I talked to Rob a while ago, but in essence, you are on this new poly tank, and you have a pump that pumps the liquid out, and then they have to service the solids every so often. But there is no drain field, at least in most of the installations that they have. So the hybrid system is out there. I mean, the City of Vero Beach has got some grant funding for that, and I know they're scrambling to put some of the infrastructure in play to be able to then, accommodate some of these hybrid systems. But the hybrid system is a little bit different, where it's not getting all the solids, it's just the liquids. So you have a smaller pump, and the liquids are of very high pressure, so it's tied into some of their existing force mains that are out there. But again, the solids are going to remain in the tank, separated by some baffles and some screens that are part of the Orenco system. So it's a good system for certain applications, but it would not be a good system for a commercial area, especially on US 1. The gravity is the way to go. There's some headaches and work that needs to be done for the DOT and the maintenance of traffic, but you put that system in, it's designed right, it's installed right, it's gonna last you 50, 80 plus years, and the onus is on us, the utility, to operate and maintain the lift station, yeah.
So obviously it's much less energy intensive in terms of the maintenance than the other
Yes, it's more
system.
capital intensive
Right.
on the initial costs in some cases, but then your O&M costs are far less. And so you look at your ROI through the life cycle of that, not only just the capital, but then your annual operating expenses year to year.
And how much is, just for argument's sake, assuming you go with the gravity system, what would the average cost be for a property owner? We're talking about businesses now, but what would be a hookup cost?
Yeah, for the residents, it's a great question. It's usually about $10,000 to $15,000 of costs to connect to a gravity type system. Only because in some cases, you do have some road work. I'll give you an example is, we're doing a project right now over in West Wabasso, and we have grant monies for installation of a gravity type system, but a lift station that's designed to our standards is gonna cost you $120,000, $150,000. Well, why does it cost so much? Well, it's because the panels are stainless steel, 304, 316 stainless, so they're not gonna corrode. You have the TVSS, the surge protection, you have the telemetry, you have the beefier pumps, you have the guide rails, and you have the deep well that has some volume. And so those costs are part of that overall cost. That is, again, initial capital costs are quite large, but once it's put in play, hopefully it's on FPL, that the KW consumption is low, and then the maintenance costs fall on the utility. So that's kind of like a baseline number. What we did for the North Sebastian area is looked at it as a per ERU cost, which is another way to look at it. And the gravity actually scored quite well when you looked at it from a per ERU. The ERU again being the equivalent residential unit. And so a house that's 2,000, 3,000 square foot house has one ERU for a family of, I think it's 2.3 people, the county's latest numbers. It's 1.6 on the island, a little bit more on the mainland. 250 gallons of water consumed and wastewater produced in a given time. So when you looked at it as a per ERU cost, with businesses having more ERUs and some of the residents only having one, the numbers were a little bit lower than what I just had quoted you.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
For an average resident, then, if they do hook up to sewer, how much will it add to their water bill?
Okay, so that's another good question. Just going to put my utility hat on. Proud to say that we have probably some of the lowest rates that you'll find anywhere, and that's good and bad. It's good for the residents. It's not good for me because I have to run a business to try to cover my costs. So my bill, I have a family of 4, and I have a daughter that likes to shower, and so we use about 6,000 or so gallons a month, and my bill is about $26 a month for water with teenagers. Now, if you live by yourself or you don't have the teenagers, it's probably going to be a little bit less. When you take the sewer in there, it goes up to about $48, $50. So it's not quite double, but it's close to that amount. So, somebody who is using, 5,000, 6,000 is going to expect to pay about $45 to $50 a month for water and sewer. Now you may say, hey, that's a lot, but I know people who pay cable, it's $250 a month. Their phone bill is $120 a month. I have a friend who's a lawyer in town that tells me that the water and sewer bill is so low he doesn't even want to pay it until it gets to be, 45, 60 days past due. So it's a concern that we have for certain areas like West Wabasso, where folks are very low income or low to moderate income, where they have difficulty paying their utility bill, but certainly we have some pretty low rates, unchanged since 1999. And we'd like to keep our rates as low as possible, but certainly we want to make sure that we continue to provide a high level of service.
I was wondering, though, if you could separate the water out from the sewer, because the water bill would have been $30 maybe, and then you add just $10 on more for sewer?
So the water's about $24, $26, and then the sewer is on top of that. So we bill our sewer based on our water. And so, you're talking, $25 or so, give or take, depending on the consumption. So without going into a lot of details, we have a tiered system that basically the more water you use, ergo sewer, the more you pay. So if you use 0 to 3,000, you're paying at rate number 1. If you use 3 to 7, it's rate 2, and then, you know, it goes from there. So it tries to tell folks to say, hey, if you're going to use less water, you're going to pay less versus, you know, if you're high consumption, you're going to pay more. So I think a good rule of thumb is to basically double your bill for purposes of just estimating on a monthly basis what it's going to cost you to go to sewer and water.
Okay. And then, for funding, have you thought about going to the governor, and since he said he was gonna give us money?
Yes. I've been up to Tallahassee. I've not been on my knees, but I've asked for some funding. I've met with Herschel Vineyard when he was the Secretary of the DEP. We've, for the last 2 years, tried to get state appropriations. In fact, this one was on the legislative priority list for the Board of County Commissioners. And unfortunately, it went through the process where it was listed in the budget, but the governor vetoed it out. Now, I think he's done a little bit of a about face to say, we will find some money for these types of projects, so we just have to make sure that our wheel squeaks really loudly, because there's other places out there that are clamoring to try to get limited dollars as well. So Martin County, Brevard, all these folks are going to be trying to go after the same dollars we in Indian River County are. Having a matrix, having a design system, having a permitted system then elevates our status, which is, I think, why we received St. John's River Water Management District cost share funding, which is another reason why we want to move forward with the design and get these permits so that we can go to the governor and say, hey, look, we're ready, and we are ready to try to move these projects forward. Because they like shovel-ready projects, they like things that are tangible, not so much the studies, not so much the ARC-and-let stuff, but the ARC-and-let stuff is what we need to be able to help some of the homeowners and some of the concerned citizens know the reasons why we're doing some of the things that we're doing.
Another question, and I know this is pretty standard, but what is the payoff time? Usually, let's say a hookup charge is $15,000, and someone is it usually amortized over 10 years, 20 years? What
usually
is that?
10 years. There's provisions. Sometimes we do 5, sometimes it's 10. In other cases, like Martin County, they actually can amortize it over 20 years. Right now, we usually do it at 10. There's an interest rate that we don't set, the Board of County Commissioners sets. And right now it's at 5% on an APR basis. It was 5.75. They just reduced it. They set that rate, I think, in January, first week or second week in January every year. So for some of the impact fees and or finance charges, those are tied to that percentage rate that the county commission is looking at. But one of the things that IRNA, Indian River Neighborhood Association, is trying to get is that third part of that, you know, four-legged stool, which is, hey, the financing mechanism. We need to do something to be able to incentivize folks so that, you know, it's not hurting them in the wallet, so that it's a small investment in a property that could be recaptured if that property is sold, because we all know that having infrastructure for property, I know I lived in Fort Pierce for a while, and I was on well and I was on septic, did not sell as high as a property, and that's why I moved to Veros to get on county water, and so those properties, when you have those infrastructures, pipes built in, you do statistically get a higher amount. So then you have to look at, you know, investing in that, and not to say that everybody's going to sell their lot, but certainly if they do sell that lot, that's part of the equation as well. So that's something that we have to do as utility, is come up with the incentives and the financing, and be able to provide some recommendations to the board to consider.
So back of the envelope calculation, in my mind, if it's, let's just say it's $15,000, it's roughly like $110 additional per month if they had to pay it on a monthly basis for 10 years, something
in addition to the consumption.
In addition to the consumptive costs, yes, yeah. Which after 10 years, you never have to worry about a septic tank or anything.
Yep.
Over time.
I have 2 quick questions. One is, do we use effluent for any of the city watering for golf course or anything in this town? Not at all? Okay. Is there been any success, there's any way we can encourage the retailers to quit selling the fertilizer in the summer? Is there any way to make that happen?
That's a great question for Alexis Thomas, the young lady that was hired. I know that she has gone on numerous outings to try to educate the box stores, but I'm not sure if the county commission has the legal authority to stop some of these big box stores from selling that. But certainly we want to try to educate folks on what it is they're buying, 'cause sometimes the labeling is not apples to apples, and one manufacturer might label it a little bit differently than another. And then to let even folks know that, hey, that nice big colorful package may mean one thing, but certainly you wanna look at the numbers associated with the fertilizer, because that's a huge component, especially near water bodies where some of that fertilizer ordinance now restricts the fertilizer application within a distance of that water body and for certain, rainy day periods that can then run off. So, I mean, you look at that picture, and I don't know if that's just from septic tanks or from fertilizer runoff, but certainly we don't wanna continue to add some of the nutrients out there. But I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think in short, I don't think we locally can restrict the sale of certain
A neighbor
fertilizers.
the other
It would
day
be
that-
good, but I'll ask Alexis, and I'm taking some mental notes to see if she can answer that question.
I might be able to add something to that because I went to the Indian River Lagoon Council meeting and Scott has offered to work with them to get a fertilizer for this area. So the big box stores, you can't ask them not to sell something, but Scott's is gonna try to get what they do sell for this area. And they're gonna work with the people in the Indian River Lagoon Council to get something for the 5 counties that are in the, Indian River Lagoon Council.
Okay.
So, that would be, you know, the way to go, get the manufacturers to work.
I have a question, Vince. Do any of the counties have a ordinance or guidelines for somebody who owns a home with a septic system saying that after so many years they have to pump it, wait till it fails?
No, there was some discussion about having a system in place with the Department of Health, and you have to understand, we, the utilities, are not over the septic tanks.
I know that, and that's.
The Department of
that's a
Health
serious
has
issue,
that
too.
whole, issue, but, I wish Cheryl was here, because she could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but there was discussion of having Department of Health do the very thing that you're saying, which is to, require periodic maintenance and or pump outs, or B, periodic inspections to ensure that everything is okay. And that failed miserably and, was kinda taken off the table. So, unfortunately, homeowners may not know if a tank is working or not working. They'll only know if it's backing up in their house. And that's why I asked the question, how do we know what's a working tank properly? So,
Because the reason I asked that, I lived on a water body up in New Hampshire, and once we built our house and we had our new septic system put in, we would get a notice every 3 years from the state telling us that it's time for you to pump out your septic system. I shouldn't say, we got it from the gentleman, the sewerage company that was in the next town over. He would send us a notice and say, okay, it's 3 years, you need to pump it, even though our tank was for a 4-bedroom house and was only 2, but that's another story. But
and then you would have to provide.
if we didn't pump it out, didn't call him to service it, then he would send a notice into the state to say, they're in arrears, they haven't done it, and then they would come out and knock on our door and say, okay, when are you gonna pump it? So I think I think it's part of people that have septic systems, that have never had septic systems, don't know how to care for them. And I think that's something that needs to be put into place somewhere, because it's gonna make people do what they should do, because people don't wanna spend $250 to get their septic tank pumped.
And everybody's so busy these days.
And everybody's so
If they're
busy
not
until it
in
backs
tune,
up,
yep.
then they realize they have a problem. I've got 2 houses on either side of me. One was empty for years. They finally turned it into a rental, and within 8 months after the rental, their septic system failed. On the other side, the kids moved back home, their septic system failed within 6 months. So, I mean, it's a habit that people need to get into.
No, I think it's a great idea. It's just a matter of whether or not some of the folks, I would think some of the septic tank haulers would be lobbying heavy for that, because that'd be more business for them. But certainly, the logistics are there to put in a program like that. It's just whether or not there's going to be support at the state level for that.
And I think the other problem is too, we've got a lot of rentals in the city of Sebastian too, that if somebody's renting a home, it's not their responsibility, some of them feel.
Absolutely. It's funny you mention that, because we track our number of final bills, and it's unbelievable. So I talked about, we're getting 105 new water accounts every month. That's pretty good growth. Some of these are in developments that are required to put in sewer, but we have such a transient, even in Indian River County, folks, we're processing over 35 finals a day. So that means somebody is saying, I'm either going from location A to B, or I'm filing my account. And, we have limited staff, we haven't increased, so we're trying to do more with less kind of thing, but there's a lot of turnover going from one account to the next, is what I'm really trying to say to beef up what you're saying.
I'd like to open up to the, public, and if you would like to come up and voice or say anything. Sure, oops, I'm sorry, come on up.
Ben Hawker out of Sebastian.
The other mic.
The other one? Okay. I asked at a meeting prior to this, why have we not banned phosphates in all laundry detergents, which is the major source going into our septic system? The city I came from, or town, that was the first thing, before the sewer systems went in. The second thing is, we've got a sewer line running right down Indian River Drive. I don't know how many people are hooked up to it, but it seems kind of illogical that if you've got a home there, the system's there, you're that close to the river, why aren't you forced to go hook up to it? I don't know where you came up with this number to hook up a house on 30 foot of pipe going to a sewer system. Seems a little exorbitant, but I guess that's how they're gonna pay for the sewer system itself. This group from the Indian River County, water, sewer, whatever, they came before the city, what was it, 2 years ago, Frank? And what did we tell them? Every homeowner, they're looking for the funding, and every homeowner or building goes up, I forget the word for it, but we basically told them, every home in the city of Sebastian over all these years, you've been collecting funds. Use those funds for the sewer. Don't come to us for any more funding. And with that, Indian River County got up and left. This is a repeat of that. But again, I'll go a little further. Where do we get our palatable water from? Is it a well in Fellsmere? A well in Orlando? I don't know where it comes from. Maybe we can get an answer to that. And they're also sending, and I believe, taking our water and funneling it into the bigger cities of Orlando, etc., and being paid for it. But they're telling us that, hey, you gotta have sewers. I came from a town that had sewers. One, they ran out of money to do it along the shore. They were going, as they're saying here, going to US 1. Well, it started at 95, putting all the sewers in. By the time they ran out of the funds, we only went in about a quarter mile into the city along the shore, almost identical to here. We got a beautiful sewer plant. It was a gravity system. They put in tanks along the shore where they put the processing plant. They covered those tanks and we got one beautiful golf course. But the benefit to the bay, which is, I'll call the river here, I was just talking to people up there. I left 10 years ago. Well, it hasn't improved. That system's been in place for 30 years. The bay is in worse conditions than when it started with the sewers. I don't know the reason for that. But I'm saying that we had the same thing. The county coming, telling us we gotta do this, we gotta do that. Maybe somebody can look up the Southwest Sewer District in New York on the island in Suffolk County and look at their record and track record. It's a carbon copy of here. But they kept digging into our pockets. And we've got a park or a home area as you come up Barber Street on the left-hand side before you get to the railroad tracks or right over the railroad tracks. I'm talking to people that are there, Park Place. They are in a sewer system. Their water bill, mine is 20-ish. Well, theirs is 120-ish, not double what this gentleman said. Now, $15,000 to put a 30-foot pipe from your front pipe on your house to the roadway? I had to do that before I left New York, because I couldn't sell a house without having it hooked up. It was under $800, and they had to de-water to hook up to the pipe on a gravity system. But again, the county's back here again, looking to reach into our pockets. And again, I don't know where you're getting these numbers of $15,000 to put 35 feet of pipe in. And
Thank you. We invited him, thank you. Yes.
again, we also have nitrogen and phosphate levels that the city is checking out here in our waterway. Maybe they could drop off their data, give it to Frank, so that our real-time number can be compared to what they're using as their theoretical numbers.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public?
I would like to ask Mr. Burke, just for clarification, I'm assuming that when we're talking about $10,000 or $15,000, we're talking about more than a 30-foot pipe, and we're talking about the infrastructure needed, lift stations, those kind of, as you said, it's $150,000 or so for a lift station, and so I assume you have to incorporate that all into the cost.
Yes. There's a lot of things I probably could respond to. I'm not sure where to begin, but
Right.
certainly I could rebut many things. But the intent is to just illustrate that there's a large capital cost, not just to get from the homeowners to the right-of-way or where that pipe is, but the associated costs with the manholes, asphalt restoration, lift station, compaction, dewatering, inspection, DEP permits, and such that go into that cost.
Another question while you're up at the podium, assuming, let's just say for argument's sake, that the priority areas that you identified in Sebastian do hook up to the sewer system, is there a capacity issue at the treatment plant where do we reach a tipping point where you actually have to build more treatment facilities?
Right, I mean, that's a two-part question. Is one, we have to look at the conveyance system to make sure that we can get it from A to B, and then the second part of it is to look at the existing capacity that's in our systems now. And I would even say that there's a third part is then to say, okay, once we have that, then the treated effluent has to go somewhere as well. So we have to take a look at all those things, and we have master plans in place that have done some analysis, but certainly part of this process is going to require some more engineering analysis to make sure that we are working with a buffer that's built in the system, so we don't run into a situation where we either run out of capacity or an ability to treat some of the wastewater properly. So that's all part of some of the work that we're going to be doing, kind of behind the scenes, in addition to just some of the upfront costs that are associated with that connection. That's great.
And a follow-up question that I was wondering too, when you were showing the map around US 1, you mentioned obviously DOT right away. Do you actually have to tear up the road, or is it mostly along the road prism that's out in the ditch areas?
Yes, we do have to tear up a portion of that road and do restoration to DOT standards. We have to work with the gas line that's in that way. Gravity is great, but you're kind of constrained by where you need to go with a certain fall based on the slopes and where you need to go. So what I failed to mention is part of that project is there are certain areas along the eastern shoulder of US 1 that do not have water. We have laterals and pipes that come across under US 1, but we're almost going to do infill for waterway so that we're not having to do another directional bore under that portion. But part of that is to go in there, find out where that gas line is, because we have limited data to make sure that we're not hitting that gas, or perhaps it has to be relocated as part of this project if we have conflicts, to do the restoration, while maintaining the flow of traffic in a safe way for the people driving, for the people working. But also we're gonna be installing, water lines, with the proper separation from the gravity sewer to have those infill areas as well, so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burke.
Please
Please.
come up to the...
If you already have a well, can you hook up to the sewer and keep your well?
Two things to that is, the question was, if you have a well and you hook up to sewer, can you have that? And the answer is yes. We do have a flat rate for some of these folks, like out in Blue Cypress, where they're on private well, but we have actually a gravity system and a force main. So there's a flat rate that they would pay, because we don't have the ability to put a meter on somebody else's well and then try to collect that. The way that we do our billing, for the gentleman who'd like to verify my numbers, is you can go onto the utilities website to verify that data for the billing that we have, is you would have a flat rate for sewer only. The second part of that rebuttal too is we have those feasibility studies that are up on www.ircutilities.com. So if you want to look at the numbers, if you want to look at the engineering, the methodology, I invite everybody to take a look at those numbers. They are up there for the public to read and review, to be broken out into the different options that were considered. So just those numbers are up there.
Okay, I lived in the Chesapeake Bay Act area, and so I went to ask the Indian River Lagoon people, and they said that that's been in effect now 20 years, and that the Chesapeake Bay has really come along nicely, and they're very happy with what the results are with the Chesapeake Bay Act area. So I think for the health of our lagoons, we really need to look at doing sewer and septic, and getting all this into the sewer system.
Yeah, I mean, there's over 30,000 septic tanks in Indian River County, more to the north and some to the south, and there's multiple ways to get to the top of the mountain, but certainly everybody has their own path. But the end goal is to get the septic tanks off in a timely fashion. Jacksonville has been doing it over a number of years. They've had areas and places that have been identified, and so I have to, make sure that everybody knows that it's a long process, because the stuff doesn't happen overnight. But certainly we want to make sure that we have that roadmap in place as directed by the board, that we can identify those areas and we can get a pathway moving forward, county-wide, regardless of, where it is in the county, based on, a defensible, unbiased criteria that can be used to make sure that we select those areas that are the most pressing, that need to be connected the fastest.
If we have some that are identified, we can't ask them, can't force them. And does county then have any way the health department, like you were saying, could help make these people who have the ability to get on sewer, get them onto the sewer? Can the county do something?
Yeah, and we're looking into trying to find out ways to make sure that there's mechanisms in place for that scenario to occur. So, the health department is responsible for the permit issuance of septic tanks, and so if a septic tank has failed, then somebody has to decide if they can spend some dollars to connect, maybe quite a long distance, to maybe a pipe, half a mile away or a quarter mile away or whatever the distance is, versus spending those dollars and trying to get a repair. So we talk quite often with Cheryl Dunn, who's the Department of Health head, to find out ways that we can work together, not only for residential, but on the commercial sector as well.
Okay. My neighbor just had to replace his whole septic system, and I think it was because he had plants planted in his yard, and the roots got into, and that was expensive. He couldn't go on to sewer, he went new septic, but very expensive.
Yeah, and I know Leon County just passed a requirement so that if your septic tank fails or needs to be re-permitted, you have to bring it up to code. So in other words, if it doesn't meet that 24-inch separation, if you need to repair it, you have to meet that 24-inch, either with the dosing pump or some modification to the system. So I know that there's been discussion here locally as to whether or not Indian River County will go down that route. I don't know where we are in that process, but that's something that's being talked about here. So that you're not just repairing like for like and putting something back in that we know is either directly in the water table or doesn't have that separation, to at least have some form of nitrification, denitrification, where we've found on the South Relief Canal, we've had high levels of ammonium going into that water column directly because there's no separation. So, you know, that's an option as well, as, you know, certainly the Department of Health is looking at. Again, that's on the septic side of things, that if it fails, to then be brought up to current standards.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Burke.
All right, thank you, guys.
Okay. Working waterfront oyster bag update. Do we have an update?
Yes, Chair, just want to highlight in your packet, we're moving forward with the, I call it the second project on the work, regarding the oyster, bag. And as we talked last time, you know, we want to have the NRB as a participant in this project. What I attached in your packet is the actual location where we're going to be looking at. This is the location where we, met with the Army Corps and DEP, as well as St. John's. And they liked what they saw, and what we did was, with Michelle's assistance, we took the same design criteria that we used for the current one that we implemented, the pilot project with the Boy Scouts, setbacks, the dimensions, and then we placed them here into our second project location, which is the working waterfront. And as you can see, along the shorelines, we can install 72 in one location and 98 in the other locations. That's what we're looking at now as a second project. So in this process right now, we're going to start the permitting to get the permits required for this project. The only caveat I want to throw out here is we are also looking at doing a shoreline restoration along this riverfront by the working waterfront. So if we are going to move forward with that, pending council and the city manager, we may hold off and push this, because I hate to put in the oyster bags and then we go up there with shoreline restoration that requires, you know, heavy equipment going back in there and tearing up what we have already installed. Maybe we should just hold back the project slightly till the shoreline restoration gets taken care of first, and then put the oyster bags in. We are in the process right now to get the permits for the shoreline restorations. We're tying that with the fine grant for the restroom that has been fully funded, and we're looking for the phase 3 portion. So hopefully, once we get the permits and the shorelines and get that constructed, then we'll move forward with the oyster bag project. But we are still going to I am currently moving forward to get the permits for the project, because the permits will last us for at least several years. So that's just an update where we are.
Thank you. Right. Sorry. Now, public input. Anybody want to say anything to the Natural Resource Board? Public input? I don't see any, all right. New business, and we have a spoil island, and that was by Mr. Clifton. So maybe, do you want to do it, or do you want to table that to next meeting also?
If you read his memorandum, he's still looking for, information from the FDEP, the feasibility of doing anything to that island. I think we should wait until he comes back in September. That way, then, he'll have his information, even whether we can even do it or not, because it is a bird sanctuary, and I don't know what authority we have in touching any of those islands. I know when we were doing island cleanups, those were off limits to us. We weren't supposed to be going on because you're not supposed to be out there, so.
All right.
That's my suggestion.
And I think we'll table it until September. Okay, I have something I'd just like to give out and ask you to look at it, and we can also discuss this next September. But doing the septic, the EPA has these little brochures you can go online and get. These little brochures, and I have the website, and we could, if we want, print them. They are free for us to print, put our logo on them if we want. And I didn't know if you would all like to do something. This tells you the do's and don'ts of your septic system, and how to take care of it, like not to put plants on them. So I didn't know if that was something, but I'd ask you, I have the website here, I'd like you to look at it.
Can do that, and I think we've had this discussion previous, since before, well, Bob was here, but we tried to do educational programs. Jane Cheney was on the board at the time, and I think that's our biggest thing. We have to educate the public, whether it be a septic system, invasive plants, the fertilizers, the herbicides. I think that's our biggest goal for us is to do this, to educate as much as we can. So if we have those and we can pass them out, and maybe we should be attending more fairs or whatever in the area.
Well, this is EPA. And I would like to say the lady from, Indian River County, Lagoon, Kathy, oh, she's a sweetheart. She got all this for me.
And we can, Madam Chair, we can probably ask, Michelle or whoever we could put the link on our NRB, website, I would think, if that would be helpful,
Yes.
the website.
Michelle, do you think we can do that? I have the website here.
I can talk to Barbara about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right, oh, man. Any other new business? All right. Staff matters. We have the Gopher Tortoise Workshop.
Yeah, if you see in your packet, I just added the email that I sent to you guys and printed off for you. Just a reminder, and I know a couple have confirmed, but if you guys still wanted to go, who haven't confirmed, it's still open, just to
Did you
let you
get my
know.
confirmation, Michelle?
I did.
Okay.
Oh, good, I plan to go too, all right.
So, Michelle, how many people are attending so far that you have?
I don't have a solid count. I think, looks like maybe up to like 30, 40 right now, maybe. I'm still
Just,
waiting on numbers.
I do want to highlight this meeting on August 18th. Just want to highlight again, I think these workshops are made more for like government staff level. I know this has been presented out, and I think we want to share it all. But I know, because I've been to the training, the DEP trainer likes to keep it more scaled down to staff level. And in this sense, the commission, I think, is considered like a staff level, but we don't want to have the general public, because I don't want to say it's not open to the public. It's because it's being trained by DEP, and they've asked us to keep it within that realm. I hate to then go beyond what the DEP asks us to do, and that's why they're saying you have to register through the DEP person, so he'll know. Because I think what his concern would be, if it comes to be such a large event, he may have not the ability to train everybody, and then that becomes a loss for that training period. So I understand what he's requesting. So he's trying to keep it within the small, controllable range. He told us, I think, between 20 to 30 was what he likes to see as the training workshop, and then if there wants more needed, they schedule more training sessions. But not to have a training session with like 100 people, even though this facility can't handle it. I just want to make sure you understand this came from the actual trainer, not us. So.
Thank you. Okay. Staff matters, can I start at the end? Dick, right? Dick. Any staff matters from our new? No? Ann, staff matter?
Nothing.
None? Okay, I have a couple staff matters. One is the, last council meeting I went to. We were put down for April 8th for Earth Day instead of April 22nd. So I went up and asked them to change the date. Yes, so we have 2 dates now, and I have to go back and tell them which date we want, but we got the April 22nd is Earth Day. So I need to go back, so I need you all to tell me what to do.
Do you know what else is going on April those are the only two available
Oh,
Saturdays?
no, the dates were, April 8th was saved out for us. I thought that was a mistake.
They usually don't do that until we request it, but
Well, we've always requested the 22nd.
we try to do as close to Earth Day as possible.
Earth Day is the 22nd.
The only other concern I have about that too is if it's weekend for Relay for Life and all these other things, that's,
Well, do we really want to celebrate Earth Day on a different day? I mean, if these other
No,
people
no.
are, in conflict, we need to, they just need to make a decision.
well, the
But I would
reason-
think we need to do Earth Day on Earth
Right, the
Day.
reason Relay for Life was not at the park last year was because we had reserved it. They had it at the high school instead.
Oh, okay.
It's just, we did well last year. Rose did a great job organizing it and getting all the vendors, so we had a great turnout. We had more vendors than we've ever had, which was
Okay.
really good, so. But I would say the 22nd is where we should, I don't know usually they don't do that, though. Usually we request it,
Well, we
to,
requested the 22nd, yes, I went and up and told them.
yeah.
So, okay, 22nd, then I'll go tell city manager that the 22nd's the day we want, okay?
And that's a Saturday, right?
That's a Saturday.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. I did,
Yes.
looking for my calendar, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, that's Saturday.
Mm.
Okay, and then, one more thing, and I need to thank Bob for this one, is they called me up and told me I broke the law. So I just wanna let you know that, my first month has been really exciting. And, it had to do with our absentee person, and I told them, Bob pointed out to me that only council can appoint and only council can take away. So I couldn't do anything, 'cause they told me I removed him from the board. And I said, no, I don't think I removed him from the board. So I just wanted to let you know I had an interesting month. Okay, thank you all. All right. Now, do we have, staff matters from,
None tonight.
oh, okay, all right. Oh, that was members' matters. Items for the next agenda. We did, we tabled a couple. So it's gonna be the, minutes, the championship program,
And the elections,
the election for vice chair,
and then Cliff's,
and the,
Jim's memorandum for the island.
okay, Jim's memorandum for the island. Anything else? Oh, I'd like to talk about the sewer, next meeting.
Septic.
Septic, septic.
And we should consider, if we incorporate, the Champion Tree, brochure, and we decide we're gonna pay for that, then we really should try to make a decision on whether we're gonna pay anything for printing of the invasive plant brochure too.
Yes, okay, invasive plant. And we don't need the working waterfront, do we?
No.
No. Okay. All right, thank you all, and the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.